Why is it that kids spend so many hours playing video games when they won't sit still for anything else? What is it that not just keeps them interested, but also advancing through the game all the way to the end? Also, and most importantly, how can we leverage those qualities and hopefully get kids as interested in education as they would be in video games? But, you may say, you're being incredibly naive. Kids are only interested in video games because they are unrealistic and violent. Kids aren't interested in learning, they only want to run around and shoot things. While that may be true, although with the proliferation of all kinds of different games exploring many topics, I would argue that that is not always true. My point is, why is it so? What is it about the design of games that keeps people interested? Why is one first-person shooting game more popular than another? Why is one perceived as having better gameplay than another? And most importantly, how do games teach people how to play and to progress through levels of skill while keeping them actively engaged and interested? Anyone who has been in the education space for a while has probably heard of the term gamification. This is a method of using the principles of game mechanics, such as scoreboards, badges, leveling, etc., to make learning more engaging and motivating for young people. In my experience as a learning designer, gamification is easy to do, but very hard to do well. Mostly because it tends to be added as an afterthought or as a layer on top of a traditional learning methodology. This means that it comes across as an attempt to put lipstick on a pig, or hide the vegetables, so to speak, as we will still want learners to swallow the traditional learning method but not notice it, because it's easier to assess that method. Where I have seen gamification work, it's usually in situations where the entire method of teaching has been restructured to incorporate the principles from the ground up. I think one of the main reasons why games are so engaging is that they are designed to be. Game makers make money through engagement, not assessment. Their business rises or falls on whether people enjoy participating in the games and tell other people about them. Education, in contrast, is more aimed at getting people through the experience as quickly as possible and out the other side with a qualification. This means the emphasis is on assessment and speed rather than on interest or keeping people engaged and spending time in the system. School is still a necessary evil. Educators are pressured to cut out anything that is superfluous, which usually means cutting costs and not focusing on anything that won't be actually measured in the curriculum. In contrast, I think games are able to develop engagement in their players by incorporating a few very important principles. Some of these are borrowed from education theory and are used because they work. This is not an exhaustive list, but here are some in no particular order. Number 1, immediate and instant feedback. If you fail to make a jump in Super Mario, then your character of Mario is going to fall to his death, instantly and immediately. If you're playing a first-person shooter and you don't time a shot correctly, or if you don't use the appropriate weapon or gun to bring down a villain, then you will know because they will kill you, instantly and immediately. There are situations where you may get through something through luck or through general button mashing your way through, but generally you will need to learn and adapt in order to proceed. That immediate feedback is necessary because a player needs to understand how what they do affects everything else in the environment. This is the primary way in which we learn growing up and how our brain understands reality through a system of trying and experimentation. If there is delayed or imperfect feedback, then the player will get frustrated because they're trying to build up a picture in their mind of how the situation works, and they can't do that without proper data. Telling a student that something you're trying to teach them is necessary for their life when it isn't immediately is doing the same thing as far as they are concerned. While it may be true that it will be useful to them 10 or 20 years down the track, they will have zero motivation to understand it now, as it isn't immediately useful to their current environment. Learning needs to be focused on a learner's current situation and how they can best operate in it. Number 2, scaffolding. Scaffolding is an education term that means introducing only the very next necessary piece of information when you need it. It's like building a scaffold up the side of a building. You build the scaffold a piece at a time as you move up the building. Each one is only placed when and as necessary and no sooner. Games do this exceptionally well. When you start a game, there is always a short tutorial at the beginning that allows you to become familiar with the controls. How do you move? How do you focus the camera or viewpoint? How do you shoot, climb, jump, etc.? These controls are always the basic ones that allow only the minimal possible movement to allow a player to get used to it. Usually the first few screens or levels will only need those basic movements, and often towards the end of those first levels, players will need to chain moves together, that is, looking at combinations of moves to achieve goals rather than introducing new ones. This is important in scaffolding because it allows players to cement the moves into their minds as they can be used in different combinations. Only when the player has themselves progressed through the levels by using these combinations of controls and proven that they are competent in using them, can they then progress to the next levels. Number 3, immediate objectives. This next point follows on from the previous one. Once a player has mastered the simple controls and go to the next levels, then the player is required to learn new controls. The way these new controls are taught is to present the player with a new and immediate threat that they must use the new controls, or weapons, equipment, skills, for example, to overcome the threat. Usually, in games, getting to a new place and finding new equipment is presented as a reward to the player, in contrast to a school environment where learning how to use new skills or knowledge is often seen as a hassle. Therefore, the players using the new equipment or controls to overcome the threat is also seen as a victory or achievement. In addition, some long-term goals in games are presented as achievements so that players can replay a game in order to gain all those achievements. Number 4, player customization. Many games, particularly video games that involve adventure role-playing aspects or first-person shooters, can also customize the player character. This could be simply in terms of adjusting the way a character looks, changing their skin and hair color or their clothes. Other ways of changing characters are in terms of the choices they make in the game. Certain decisions that the player makes in a game will influence how other characters behave towards them and will influence the story that they play through. Players are encouraged to make moral choices and to see the consequences of their actions, as well as to see how they can get to a certain objective through the choices they make. Often, a game will make a choice very clear using different portions of dialogue that a player has to choose between during an interaction. In this way, players can see where their choices will take them and often can see whether their choices will get them closer to an immediate objective or further away. In addition, some games will provide a technology tree or sometimes a skill tree, whereby a player can deliberately choose to pick up certain skills or equipment because it will allow them to progress in the direction they want to go. There are many other ways that games teach players how to behave and how to win. For the moment, though, one of the main reasons games are so effective in teaching players is because they have 2 important overriding principles. Firstly, the goals that the player is trying to reach are broken down into step-by-step goals which are immediately understandable and achievable. Each player isn't just trying to win the game so much as they are trying to defeat the next enemy, or jump over the next canyon, or clear the next level, and the way they do that, while hard to do, is easy to understand how. Secondly, failure is not punished. If you fail, it only means you go back to your last save point and start again. You don't get made fun of or penalized for how much time it takes you to do something or how many lives you went through. You only get rewarded for accomplishing it. Failure is not a problem. It's not something to be feared or run from. It's a learning experience. The only real failure is to give up and therefore miss out on the experience. That's something I wish they had taught me at school.